infrastructure projects in Greece. So I would like to introduce our panelists. Konstantinos Vassiliou is Deputy CEO at Eurobank and is the head of corporate and investment banking at Eurobank. His team is working on the most important projects, on the financing of the most important infrastructure and acquisition projects. We also have Penelope Lazaridou. Penelope Lazaridou is General Financial Manager and Executive Member of the Board of TERNA, which is a group of companies mostly involved in infrastructure and energy. Penelope's career before that was in Eurobank. She was a general manager there and had several positions in Piraeus subsidiaries. She is also an active member of Women on Board, which is led by the Harvard Business School. She is also a member of the Greek ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce. George Mylonogiannis is the chairman of the board of ELLAKTOR SA, which is a construction company. And he is also a founding partner of FMDA law firm. And then we also have Sachinis, who is the CEO of the Athens Water and Sewerage company. We Greeks know it as EYDAP. And he has had a long career in the US, leading businesses of Standard & Poor's and McGraw-Hill. And he was also chairman of DEPA, which is the largest natural gas company in Greece, and now is leading the Athens, actually, Greek water and sewerage company, which is serving half of the population of Greece. Now, it seems that we have three executive persons from the infrastructure sector of the economy, and we also have a banker. So I will start with the banker. And the first question is, Kostas, so many people talk about investment spring in Greece. Do you believe that this is correct? Do you believe that this is indeed something that is reflected in your experience? And if so, what are the most important areas driving the investment growth?
Hello? Okay, perfect. Good morning, Anastasia and Athanasia, and good morning to all. Thank you for the question. As a banker, naturally, I will address the question with numbers and facts. I believe that the answer is clearly yes, in the sense that we are in the beginning of an investment spring in Greece. Actually, 2022. It's going to be the first year following after 2009 that we're going to have a positive balance in the investments in the country. And when we speak about positive balance, we mean practically that the gross investments are higher than the actual depreciation of the investments assets in the country. In 2021, we had a record in the last 20 years of FDI in the country with 5.5 billion euros, or 3% of the country's GDP. And we have every evidence, because actually we're in the last month of 2022, that this record year will be broken in 2022. We expect that 21, 22 and 23, the increase in the investments as a percent of GDP will reach almost 8%. However, we have a very large journey in front of us, and because the gap is high, I will give you two numbers. The unfortunate reduction of the Greek crisis in the last 10 years in the actual investments and the assets of the country was close to 100 billion euros. So you understand that we need such growth rates for at least a decade in front of us, just to cover the deficit that has been created during the crisis. Now you asked me which are the sectors that are driving this growth. We see growth in every sector of the economy, but 5 areas we identify as the main growth sectors. First is infrastructures infrastructure and commercial real estate. We see a lot of activity in roads through concessions, in the airports of the country, which are critically important for the tourism as well, in ports and also in commercial real estate. We haven't seen a lot of activity, again, due to the crisis in the last 10 years, so we see a lot of developments for green buildings and a lot of demand. The sector is definitely energy, backed by the decarbonization. There we see a lot of investments backed by major privatizations on a 360-degree basis, and this is the important thing in the country. So we see investments in the infrastructure of gas pipelines. We see a lot of investments in the high and medium voltage, which is a prerequisite in order to have investments in the power generation sector. And we see major investments both in what we call base load power generation of the country, so energy generators with natural gas, but also renewable energy. This is extremely important because we believe that in the next years it's going to be a new form of exports for the country, and helps a lot in the autonomy of the country in its energy, and especially these days due to the Russian invasion in Ukraine, Greece will play a significant role on that front. The third sector is telecommunications and digital transformation. We see a lot of investments both in fiber optics across the country, but also in 5G technology, which is extremely, it's extremely important primarily for the tourism sector, but also we see a lot of investments on data centers and new technology. Of course, tourism, I'm not going to elaborate on this one. It's on the forefront of the economy always. And last but not least, we see, which is very positive, a lot of investments in the core industry, primarily industries that are extrovert and they're focusing on exports. Thank you.
Okay, and is there enough capital available, and is there any risk because of the as to the viability of those projects because of the rising interest rates? What do you think?
Look, I mean, that's a very good question, because we're talking about a lot of investments, and always the question is how these investments will be financed. As you can imagine, again, I will talk with numbers. First of all, the envelope of these investments, we calculate them at around 32 to 38 billion within the next 4 years. You have equity, and on the equity side, it's very fortunate that there is tremendous interest in Greece, both from Greek strategic and financial investors, but also from international strategic and financial investors. I can give many examples, but we see a lot of large tickets investing in Greece in the last 2 years. Then you have on the debt side, you have debt capital markets, and then you have Greek and international banks. There the news, unfortunately, is on the one side weighted. Why? Because debt capital markets these days are open globally, but they're not very competitive, so there is availability, but not in competitive terms. And unfortunately, international banks are commercial banks, totally absent from the country. Thankfully, we have supranationals that they're very active. On the positive side, we have Greek banks, and I'm not saying that as a Greek banker, it's factual, that following dealing with the legacy issues, the Greek banks now have good capital and a lot of liquidity to finance these projects, and with the support of other sources, and this is extremely important, like RRF, we expect that these projects will need approximately 24 billion debt in order to be implemented in the next 3 years. So we expect that 8 billion will be through the RRF, and the remaining 16 billion by primarily the 4 systemic banks. This is an amount that will be easily handled by the Greek banks. The only question there is a little bit concentration risk, because there's a lot of concentration in specific areas and specific groups. The banks not only they have a lot of appetite, because all these sectors are what we call in the banking sector defensive sectors, because it's the key infrastructure of the country. So if you're not going to finance the key infrastructure of the country, then what else you will finance? Now you asked about interest rates and how this will affect the investments. Naturally, someone would have said that in a rising environment of interest rate, then the investors might be scared or might be a little bit skeptical if they will move on with investments or not. We don't see any such evidence in Greece so far, because on the end of the day, the investors primarily will review what is the IRR that they will achieve from the investments, and it seems that the returns that they expect from their projects in Greece are good enough to move on. Also in Greece we have an amazing opportunity and a unique opportunity across Europe, which is the Recovery and Resilience Fund. I don't know how our guests are familiar with it, but primarily 50% of the investment, if eligible, could be financed through RRF jointly with the commercial banks, and this is through fixed rates at a very, very competitive rate. So in this environment, it's amazing progressing with an investment that 50% of the debt is going to be at fixed rates for 12 years at a very, very competitive rate. So if any first-year analyst in a company will run the numbers, the RRR actually is not affected. So Greece, because of this unique situation, actually I don't see any problem of holding back investments. Thank you.
Thank you. Penelope, do you believe that the infrastructure projects can act as a remedy to basically protect against the Soviet economic downturn? Do you see any challenges there?
First of all, it's an honor to be here in person with all you valuable colleagues and friends. Indeed. I remember that during the Great Depression, the famous British economist John Keynes argued that government spending and investment can have a positive impact on good employment and economic stability. Now, more recent literature reaffirms this argument, putting the GDP multiplier of more than 2 for every euro spent on infrastructure project. So the answer is inevitably yes, infrastructure increases GDP, and subject to programs magnitude can improve the economic metrics. Greece stands at a turning point as there is an influx of investment programs tapping some of the most dynamic sectors of our economy. According to a recent study, further to what Konstantinos mentioned, total investment projects in Greece for the next 3 years are estimated at circa 23 billion. Yet TERNA participates in this investment spree by an amount of roughly 7 billion, and I can assure that more is yet to come. Specifically, the contribution of TERNA in its core operating segment of transportation, infrastructure and energy, both RES and conventional power generation, exceeds 4% of the total investment in this sector. So, countries' swapping investment program is funded by diverse portfolio of sources, by FDIs, by RRF, domestic investors, national funds. Financing this ambitious and inspiring infrastructure investment scheme will not be easy, so I fully share your concerns raised through your question, and we need to be mindful and vigilant about risk that can actually jeopardize this unique, once-in-a-generation opportunity to upgrade our country's economic league. Regarding risk, I will summarize and underline that all of you know that neither funds nor resources are infinite, so people are responsible for selecting, approving, promoting investment scheme must prioritize investments depending on how much GDP and ESG accretive this investment could be. If the financial system lacks stability, we will never be able to deploy this aspiring national investment program. So the financial result and the position of all Greek systemic banks are impressive, and even compared with European peers. So I'm confident about their ability to empower the national investment endeavor, but also be quite mindful of the risk that we became complacent and taking things for granted. So political systems need to continue to safeguard financial stability and to resist the temptation of putting this into the national election agenda. The red tape risk. Peter Drucker, famous management consultant, once said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, the same goes here for procedure and implementation, which can easily eat for breakfast even the most aspiring investment program. So we must be vigilant about the red tape and execution risk. There are also other risks regarding the current economic condition, interest rate and inflation in raw materials, in energy, but what I believe is that all these risks can be at least partly balanced through financial and contractual hedging. So ultimately, there will be an impact on projects' returns performance, but it's not expected that will alter the economics for the large players. And as a closing remark, I would like to highlight the need to proceed with this ambitious infrastructure program, because it is these investments that, among other things, secure countries' stability once we become investment grade. TERNA Group, with decision management team and the consistent track record of developing infrastructure projects with ESG characteristics for over 2 decades, has the competitive advantage to play a leading role and a major contributor in this serious initiative. Thank you, Anastasia.
George, could you identify any challenges that are relevant to the implementation of infrastructure projects? And could you also tell us if these challenges are just, so to say, unique for Greece?
Thank you, Athanasia. Thank you for being invited in such a prominent event. Unfortunately, I have to say yes, there are challenges. However, I have to clarify from the very beginning that such challenges are not related exclusively to Greece. I could say, and I will revert to that at the end of my statement, that Greece is less affected than other EU countries of the challenges that I will outline. We all know that the decade 2020 to 2030 is what I call the unexpected, the decade of the unexpected facts. We all know nobody could ever expect or imagine that 100 years following the end of the Spanish flu, another pandemic would occur in Europe, or 75 years following the end of the Second War, we would have a war in the European territory. These facts, apart from the tragedy of the victims, of the people who lost their lives or their houses and all of that, they had some side effects. The side effects are the double-digit inflation, the interruption in the supplies chain, the increase of the raw material to a degree higher than what we call inflation. And I can say that the companies like our group are more affected of these facts for the reason that infrastructure projects are long-lasting. There is a disadvantage that pricing should be fixed from the very beginning, and it's almost impossible to predict during the implementation, which may last 3, 5, 6 years or more, what is going to happen. And of course, it's impossible to predict the facts that we all experienced the last years. In addition, speaking about challenges, we have the deglobalization, which means that capitals cannot move as in the past. We all know that there are countries which are restricted from the export of capitals. And another D, I have to add another D, which is defense. We all know that Germany, for example, has announced a budget for defense amounting to 100 billion euros. It's obvious that resources are not endless, and such amounts will not be injected in the real economy. Now coming to Greece and to the second part of your question. I said from the very beginning that Greece has not been affected as other EU countries. And this is not a vague statement. Mr. Vassiliou told us said us some figures that are evidencing that. For example, after a long-lasting crisis, we had a decrease in unemployment. We have a growth which is maybe the highest within the European Union. And the most important is that there are many companies investing in Greece. We have funds either in the form of direct investment, as it happened in our group, in ELLAKTOR group, or investment through concessions and participations in infrastructure projects. So I think I have responded to your query, Athanasia.
Mm-hmm. So, talking about natural resources, I think water is probably the most precious, and therefore what are the infrastructure plans for water? Harry?
Okay, very nice to be here, and thank you for the question. We already spoke about some of the challenges that we're all facing, including geopolitical challenges, the economic crisis, inflation, and so on. And in the water industry, there is one more crisis to take into account, and that is the climate crisis. So, serving half the population of Greece, of about 5 million people, we have to take that into account as well and see what we're doing. Now, obviously, I'm going to talk more about drinking water, but let's think about the opportunities actually that exist in this environment, even for water that is for agricultural purposes, which is about 80% of the total water use in Greece. And the important thing to know there is that there are several PPPs that are going to go ahead from the Agricultural Ministry and that are going to give opportunities to a lot of the construction companies. But let's focus a little bit on EYDAP and drinking water. There is no water scarcity right now, but looking at what may happen in the future because of the climate crisis, one has to think ahead and to figure out what we can do now to prevent any possible crisis in the future. So one of the things that we're focusing on, and we're going to be spending possibly about 500 million euros on this, is reducing our non-revenue water, reducing the leaks, and we're going to do that in two ways. One is to replace some of the old water networks that are in Athens, and the other one is, and that is something that we're going to decide on in 2023, and hopefully it's going to be a positive decision, and we're going to move forward with this, is installing water meters, electronic smart meters, and that's going to help us with reducing the non-revenue water and provide the ability to users to regulate their water usage. Another big project that we're working on, and we're going to be spending, we're actually started spending 800, or investing actually 800 million euros on this, is putting all new wastewater networks in Eastern Attica. This is a project, the 800 million euro mark may sound really huge, it is huge, but 90% of that is actually financed by the European Union, so that's the good news. We're moving forward with that. It's going to last for another 5 to 7 years until we implement that. This is going to improve the services that we provide to the community, but on top of that, all the water that is being generated from these new wastewater treatment plants is going to be used for irrigation in the area around the Athens airport. Beyond that, we're also looking at taking advantage of the second largest wastewater treatment plant in Europe. That's a plant that we run together with some companies that are represented here in the panel. And the idea there is to replace a lot of the water that we use for industrial uses, to replace it with recycled water from that wastewater treatment plant. And also we have assigned about 250 million euros for moving towards net zero. We have already built some photovoltaic plants. We are planning and studying to build some hydro plants as well. And the idea is to be able to be a net zero water company by 2030. Overall, this accounts for about 1.6 billion euros in investment. A big part of that is financed by the European Union. We are always looking in all the different programs that are available in Greece, but also directly programs available by the European Union to see how we can finance some of the projects that we want to do. We also have 250 million euros in cash, and we have no debt. So there, the news is that we need to move to some better capital structure, but that gives us an opportunity to invest the money where we need to make some positive changes for the people in the Athens area. So all of this with our partners in the construction industry, we're supporting the economy, and we're trying to ensure the uninterrupted supply of water, and that is actually quality water at very reasonable prices. We have the second lowest prices in all of Europe.
So what are the social and governance issues for water?
Yeah, right. Obviously, I talked about the E side of ESG up until now, and that is actually both. I talked about water and what we're doing to reduce the leakages, and I talked about energy and all the plans to move to net zero, but all of the things that I talked about and all these investments are targeting the people of Athens, so we have a big S there in our minds. But the most interesting part in our case is the governance part, because in governance it is relatively complex. We are owned 50% plus one share by the state. We talk directly with 5 ministries. The Ministry of Economy through the Superfund is our shareholder, but the rules are set by the Ministry of Energy. The Ministry of Infrastructure is the ministry that oversees us. So, but that's okay. All those are European, and Greek rules that ensure the quality of the water and the security of supply, so we're used to work on that. Also though, because we're a listed company, that's also good news for the investors, because that provides them with some security, and we have to abide by all the capital market rules. And finally, and actually I think, but not finally, this is number 3 of the governance. There are 4 items in the governance. So number 3 of the governance is the fact that even though there is a regulatory framework, it has not been applied yet, but a new regulator is coming into place. They're going to be voted in by Parliament in January of 2023, so a month from now. Having the new regulator in place will bring clarity for our revenues and for our profitability for the next several years. And the 4th item of governance is the overall ESG governance, which now we are self-governed with all the ESG principles. But the idea here is that the European Union is also going to provide some ESG guidelines that we're going to also have to abide with. So overall, if you look at all of that, we're naturally an E company of ESG, naturally an S company, and definitely the governance, we are balancing all the different stakeholders, and I think that is for the good of the company, the community, and our investors.
Thank you. And Penelope, with respect to the infrastructure investments, how does this work together with the ESG values and priorities?
Thank you for the questions. Although this question could easily be a PhD thesis, I strongly believe that you do not really need a PhD in order to understand this. Any type of infrastructure project always support at least 2 out of the 3 ESG criteria. For some cases, it is self-explanatory. For example, renewable energy go hand by hand with the environmental and social targets of the ESG movement. Renewable energy promotes the monumental goal of reducing carbon emissions. Based on EBRD study, total investment in renewable energy in Greece are estimated for the next 7 years at 10 billion, allowing the country to reach a total installed capacity of 25 giga, with the TERNA group budgeting more than 6 billion for the same period. The same goes for infrastructure projects in waste and water management, both protecting the environment and promoting a wider usage of valuable natural resources. Based on Greek state announcement, the Greece PPP portfolio on waste and water for the next 4 years are equal to 1.4 billion and 0.9 billion respectively, with the TERNA group having invested already 0.2 billion in waste management projects. However, there are other energy infrastructure projects with more indirect ESG implication. For example, the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, the IGB, the under-planning is the Med-Gas pipeline with a budget more than 11 billion. Electricity interconnection between Greece, Cyprus, Israel, early estimation for a budget of 3 billion, and electricity interconnection between Crete, mainland of Greece, and Egypt, early estimation for a budget 3.5 billion. All these are environmental conscious, promote growth, diversify the energy mix, and promote also the stability of the region. Again, TERNA aspires to play an active role in all these projects, and indeed it is already a critical actor in some of them. Now, it's interesting the correlation between the digital and ESG. According to the Greek state, the budget for digital infrastructure will exceed 1.3 billion in the next years. This type of project, of course, will contribute to the digital transformation of the country, will improve the know-how for people, but these are the evident benefits of digital infrastructure, referring to social principle of the ESG acronym. But there is also another, less visible, but
value-accretive implication caused by digital investments. This relates to transparency, inclusion, meritocracy, all promoted by digital investment, and ultimately leading to enhanced governance, which is the third principle of the EAG acronym. TERNA actively participates in digital infrastructure projects like the ultra-fast broadband with Mylonogiannis, aiming to improve internet connectivity through a fiber optics network. More customer infrastructure projects like transformation concession also add to ESG values, and a related, again, EBRD study showcases that sustainable transformation investment is a key enabler of economic growth and trade, providing the network, providing the services on which the economics depends. TERNA is the proud owner and sponsor to some of the most emblematic transportation concessions in Greece, well known like the Nea and Kendriki Odos 720 km 5 year in operation, the participation on Olympi Odos 200 km 5 years in operation again. New project will add to our concession portfolio Ignatia 900 kilometers, and the north axis, the participation on the north axis of Creta, the PPP, and last but not least, the Castelli International Airport in Heraklion, under development, in process, the second largest airport in our country. Closing my response, I would like to highlight that the promotion of the ESG principle through the deployment of infrastructure project, it's not a type of recent times, it's not just a politically correct trend. It is a value-accretive investment, and as Milton Friedman, the late Nobel Prize winner, and I believe professor, once wrote back in 1970 in his famous New York Times article, there is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profit as long as it engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. So engaging in infrastructure investing is the safest way both to pursue the ESG values, but also to maximize values for the shareholders.
Thank you, Penelope. George, there is the priority for the EU under the transform policies because of the pandemic is, among others, to ensure smart, inclusive, and sustainable growth. So how does sustainability work together with infrastructure projects?
Thank you, Athanasia. I will start with a question. So sustainability is a burden or an opportunity? There is no doubt that the EU initiatives concerning sustainable development should be taken into consideration by all markets and all companies, including, of course, the infrastructure projects. There is an endless number of acronyms: CBAM, no financial reporting, ESG, net zero. Mr. Skianos, who is sitting here, could give us many examples of that, and hopefully in the next session. So, in addition to that, acronyms which, of course, reflect obligations for the companies and impose obligations. Some of the latest instructions of the EU discussed in Minister Councils, which are very interesting, I believe, is the development of infrastructure of alternative fuel, development of infrastructure related to refuel EU aviation, fuel EU maritime, in addition, of course, to the famous Fit for 55, which is the obligation to reduce by 55% the CO2 emissions by 2030. Remains so, all these issues remain priority for the EU. Infrastructure projects should be oriented to the satisfaction of the requirements that EU imposes in connection with sustainability. in addition, when we have to, for instance, make a new motorway, we have to think about electric vehicles, but also infrastructure related to ports and to airports should consider the concept of alternative fueling. The storage of energy is also a new parameter. I'm convinced that all entities involved in infrastructure projects, namely civil engineering companies, designers, developers, have a deep knowledge of the needs of the projects for meeting the sustainability criteria. Large groups like ELLAKTOR, apart from being prepared to meet the construction needs of sustainable, let's say, projects, are directly involved in sustainable investment and renewables and waste management. So the first part, namely the obligation to meet the requirements of EU, is a burden. The next issue, the involvement in sustainable projects like waste management, is an opportunity. And I have to thank you, Haris, for mentioning the cooperation that we had in waste management. So I think I have responded, Athanasia.
And I think there is some optimism among the panel. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.